the concept of security has expanded to not just being the inner circle, the 50 or 200 people in the company who really need to be protected. It needs to be all the 120,000 employees, because every single employee could be tricked into clicking a phishing email or something, and then you have that problem started. This is really not about, it's about regulations, but it's about business continuity. If your company's IT structure goes down for 3 days, what's left of your company then? Right? So that's what I see with my customers. Like they are trying to keep up with the threats outside and the regulations, but the regulations are usually a little bit behind the threats. But what you're trying to do is really to secure and safeguard their business operation. The vision is it's massive. I mean, Stina talks about making the internet secure for everyone, right? So that vision and mission is really, it's both important, relevant, and extremely attractive, I think, for everyone. I think it started a little bit smaller than that. It started with Jacob saying that security is important, and security systems have been around for a long time, but they're usually quite complex and it's not that easy to use them. So the challenge is to have security and usability. And that's where I think Jacob first saw the opportunity, right? How do we build something that's both secure and user-friendly? He talks a lot about smart cards. He comes from the smart card industry. And then you have to have readers and you have to have software. And he wanted something that just works out of the box and is so easy to use and also as secure as a smart card environment. So that's really how it started, making security easy to access and usable for everyone, so that it can spread and everyone can use it. And that kind of became the let's make internet a secure place for everyone.
Which I think is really cool and quite gutsy for a startup to frame such a vision. But I also think one of the cool things about it is also the fact that the ability to implement high-level advanced security with user-friendliness front and center. And I think it goes back to the old paradigm that the best security is actually the security implemented. And I think that's kind of spot on where I guess you guys, the spot that you moved into.
I do think that the CISO role has changed, as you say, from being a little bit, you guys just figure out what we need and then they get as many no's as they give as well. Like, we need more money to do this. Is it really necessary? But going from there is like security has become, of course, a key factor for everything, to protect the IPR, to protect business continuity. So CISOs, I believe, have had a bit of a new heightened role over the last decade and started to look at, okay, how do we implement security everywhere, not just in our most obvious attack points, but how do we secure our supply chain, how do we secure our consultants, and how do we make this, that's the first step. How do we implement security? And I think everybody who saw the pandemic, what happened, everybody started to working from home. A lot of European companies had implemented ways to work from outside the office, some kind of authentication system. Other places in the world didn't have that, and they struggled. They had to get something in place very, very quickly. And then you just choose something, you pick something and you use that. The European companies, they more expanded what they already had. But what happens next is that, okay, we have security, but people are bypassing it or trying to get around it. So now we need to make it usable. What we have worked in the 80s, it worked in the 90s. We're starting to see a cloud world. We're starting to see people working from home more, and we're starting to see much more distributed workforces. So how do we get a system, a security in place that takes into account this new world of homework and the cloudification and the modernization of IT? So now it's more like, okay, how do we go from what we built a few years ago into something that's going to work for us in the next decade? The challenge here is to be able to separate different identities as well, my personal identity, my work identity, and still be able to use both of them when I'm not in the office. There's so many nuances and so many aspects of this. In the past, it was enough for a company to secure the office. Nobody can come in unless they have an access card, and then when they're inside, they have access to all the assets of the company. But now it's like now everybody's traveling, everybody's sitting at home. There are third-party people accessing company assets from outside. So there are many more identities that need to be catered for inside the companies, and they also have to be secure. The first step is just to say it has to be implemented everywhere and everybody has to use it. But it's a little bit of a dry subject. It's like, okay, so you log in everywhere, but you have your password and your username, and you might not think that you have anything to protect outside of that. So why should I use multi-factor authentication as an individual? But it's a bit, maybe using the analogy of moving into a new apartment. You buy a new apartment, you move into it, and if you don't change the locks, you have the key to the door, but you don't know who else does. That's how I see a password today, because you logged on to hundreds of web pages in your life, and you have used the same password for 80 of them. I mean, I'm not saying I am, but that's how many people do it. So at some point, LinkedIn or Facebook or anything is going to get hacked. Someone's going to have your password. That means that they have the key to your door, and you don't know that they have the key to your door. So just keeping the lock on your newly bought apartment is not a good idea, because anyone could have that lock. So what you do is when you buy a new apartment, you change the locks. Then only you have the key, right? So that's a little bit how I see multi-factor authentication. You change the locks, you add another upper lock that only you have access to. You never give that out. That means that you can always be sure that nobody gets into your apartment. And that's a little bit how I see MFA. You have to assume that everybody has your password. If it's only password and username, then someone's going to have your password. That means that they can access your assets.
Do you see differences in adoption rates?
The pandemic showed some gaps in all areas, in all parts of the world. You have different pockets in different parts of the world who are more advanced and less advanced. So you can't really say that America is more advanced, or all of America is all advanced, but or all of Asia is more advanced, or all of Europe is more advanced. But we can see that there's a lot of leapfrogging going on. Everyone who is lagging a little bit behind, whether they're Americas or Asia, they try to get ahead. You don't go from SMS to one-time password now. You go from password and username to FIDO2. That's the journey that people are making, and people are really putting a lot of effort into making that happen. A lot of investments. If we take the bigger picture, we look at the investors, the owners of the companies, and even beyond that, if we look at energy supply or utilities in a country, that has to operate for society to operate. So for a company, it's about, do we exist tomorrow or not after hacker attack? And for a company, or a country, it's almost like, does the country continue to operate if we're being attacked by a foreign nation, for example, in terms of cyber attacks? So that's why it's so important. It's not just the CISO, it's the board of the company. Without IT infrastructure, without security, we don't have a company, we don't have operation, we don't have revenue. For government, it's without energy supply, food supply, logistics, we don't have a country. So it's that important. So it's not just a fun thing, it's actually an absolute necessity to work with security.
What are the key trends or movements where we are and where we're going?
Well, first of all, we're still in a password world, right? And we're going to see password remain for quite some time. And we have smart cards developed in the 70s, and we have one-time passwords. There's still many different types of multi-factor authentication that coexist. And I can see that's going to continue. But with cloudification, and with cloud becoming much more important, companies moving their assets over to cloud, I see that we will see FIDO2 become a dominant standard, like smart cards have in the past. And FIDO2 is the modern way of authentication. So we could always argue, is there going to be a FIDO3, or what's next? But I still think we're in the early days of FIDO2. What I would like to see, and what I'm seeing out with our customers, that the customers my customers are trying to move to a FIDO2 world, because they can see that this is the future, this is what they need, this is going to give them strong security, easy to use. I like the fact that we're growing a new generation of internet citizens into a higher consciousness of security.
Exactly. So if the vision is to actually secure the internet, you have to have the users with you, and so probably a good bet to bet on the next generations.
It is, and it's easy to say I don't need security because what's interesting in my Gmail, but it's not that. We have online identities, all of us, and for us as individuals or for our kids, that's an increasing necessity to secure our identities. And then we have other people like journalists reporting on conflicts, dissidents in different countries. So how do they secure their email and their access? And I think that's a good thing where Yubico is actually very active in also defending the free word and the democracy drive that we can protect people who need even more protection.
But I really like the idea of giving, in your case, the keys to your kids, right? Because yes, it can be devastating for a teenager to be hacked and have photos and whatever floated on the internet. But of course, it's also about training on the right behaviors. People tend to talk about security by design and default. You're actually doing that with your kids, right? I think that's a great idea. I actually think more should pick that up. Maybe that's, in Sweden we tend to have the Christmas gift of the year, and it's a big thing in media, and so there we have it, right? So all school kids should have a security key.